Before we get into today's video, I'd like to give a big thank you to the loved ones of Shayna Bryant, who I'll be discussing today. See, today's story is one that I've been meaning to cover in great detail for a long time. I actually covered it on TikTok almost 2 years ago, and it was then that someone reached out to me. They let me know how much this event affected them and how it still sticks with them till this day. When it comes to hearing stories like these, a lot of the times the details stick with us, and it could be very tough to get through. With that being said, today's story contains some of the worst details I've had to cover on this channel. So before jumping in, please do keep that in mind. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Now, this subject is not new. We have observed instances of abused and battered children that have died from repetitive violence. This is an old subject, but has gotten a lot of notice in the public press and in scientific publications. But I want to point out and emphasize that we have observed these cases for a long time, and it is the responsibility of the physician and also the pathologist, when he encounters a case of this sort, to notify the authorities, the Department of Public Welfare, the police department, so that an adequate investigation can be made. Physicians sometimes shy away from this responsibility with the excuse that they don't want to get involved, that perhaps the family...
When a child is laid to rest, the tragedy comes with a host of questions, as it should. What led to this? Why was this child left in the wrong hands? Who could ever do something so horrible to a child? These are questions that anyone would ask. We know we live in a world where not everyone is fit to be a parent, but what about the systems that are put into place to prevent tragedies like this? When do they step in? A lot of times, the veil of secrecy that covers child services only makes it more difficult to find out the truth of what happens behind closed doors. Many would say these aren't children who fell through the cracks. They were innocent children who were allowed to fall through, as the same steps are carried out over and over again, with the same tragic results. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is Safe from Harm, the story of Shayna Bryant. Shayna Bryant was born on March 28th of 1990 and resided in Brooklyn and the Bronx. She was born to a man named Orlando Bryant, 51 years old, and a woman named Shayna Bryant, 38 years old. They resided in the East Tremont section of the Bronx, with Shayna and her 4 other siblings. By the 90s, the Bronx had a long history of crime, poverty, and drugs running rampant through the borough. Many families would be affected for decades to come, and in a multitude of ways. Shayna's family looked to be just like any other in the neighborhood, normal and to themselves. It was said that the parents were often seen walking the children to school, and the whole family could always be seen in attendance at church every Sunday morning. The relationship between parents and children seemed to be normal. Any neighbors or friends of the family stated that they seemed to want the best for their children. They were always said to be attentive and loving parents. While things might have seemed normal from the outside looking in, there were ongoing struggles for the adults in the family that not many were aware of. This would affect the children more than anything. For some of them, it would start before they were even born. According to reports, Shayna's parents were struggling with drug addiction and were known to use different substances throughout the years. Her father had been to prison previously for selling drugs, but it would be the use of substances that would affect the children more than anything. Life for Shayna was extremely difficult from the very moment she was born. She would be the 3rd child out of 5 that was addicted to the drugs that their mother was taking while she was pregnant, passing her addiction on to them in the womb. In Shayna's case, the drug was coke. Because of this, the family would become known to the Human Resources Administration, or HRA. The children would end up in foster care on several occasions. In April of 1990, only 3 weeks after she was born, Shayna was taken out of the care of her parents. She would be placed with a foster family in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Her foster mother was a kind woman, a single mother to 5 children of her own. Shayna would be the first child that she ever fostered. Being a mother to 5 children, she had a great deal of experience when it came to parenting. But Shayna was different from any of her other children. The baby was still addicted to coke. This meant that her foster mother faced the unpredictable challenge of nursing her off the drugs. She would have moments of withdrawal, making for frequent visits to the doctor. She was also allergic to different foods. Anytime she was fed, her foster mother would check her entire body for rashes. The child often struggled to sleep and would become restless, battling with more effects of withdrawal. Moments like these, her foster mother would feed her as much milk as she wanted. The doctor told her this might help, since it might have been the child's way of pushing through the withdrawal. It was harder than it sounded, but with time, little Shayna made it through. Within a few months, she was by all accounts a happy baby, surrounded by people who loved her. Her foster mother loved having her around, as did the rest of the children. They'd become used to her big smile and her adorable laugh. She was described as the friendliest baby, trying to communicate and play with other children from the moment she started walking. It was stated that she was the type of child to walk up to another kid in the street or at the park and greet them with a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. It was how she was used to being greeted by those who were caring for her, and she passed that same love on to others. The family would call her Pollo, which translates to chicken. It was just a nickname they had for her because she had quickly become a part of the family. She was learning how to speak more and more, little by little, starting to become more and more active. She loved playing with the other kids in the home or taking their toys for herself. Just as vibrant and innocent as you'd expect. Pictures kept by her foster family showed Shayna smiling and very happy. It was clear that she was placed in caring hands, a family who wanted the absolute best for her, and they were providing her with a safe, loving home like she deserved. In June of 1991, after spending 14 months with this family that she had been placed with, a loving family, Shayna was removed from the care of her foster family and placed back with her biological parents. The family was sad to see her leave. They had grown used to having her around, and they loved her. The next few years of Shayna's short life, however, would be entirely different. For the foster mother, letting her go was much harder than she imagined it would be. It worried her, because she knew the environment might not have been the best for the child. She had even tried adopting Shayna before this, but when she did, her biological parents wouldn't allow it. They wanted their child back. Once Shayna was back in the Bronx, she was surrounded by her siblings, children ranging from different ages, who also loved her and loved having her around. The children did what they could to just be kids and made the best of their environment. Shayna and the rest of the children could often be seen playing tag in the hallway of their floor, along with other kids who lived next door. Neighbors would come to know Shayna for being much smaller than the other kids and for her big smile. Even if she left the family she had grown used to, she was a child who looked happy to be with her siblings. When it came to life inside the home, HRA concluded that the children all belonged with their parents, despite the history there. With the drug issue out of the way and the family together again, it would seem like this was a big step forward, but there were other problems. Dating back to 1987, years before Shayna was even born, there was a record of child abuse in the household. It was a big reason they were known to HRA, as mentioned. Caseworkers visited the home numerous times between 1987 and 1994. During their last visit in December of 1993, they stated that they didn't find any reason to remove the children. Everything seemed normal. But the truth was that drugs were still a problem and were still being used. There was also much more to the story when it came to abuse. The children were facing punishment on a daily basis, resulting in violent beatings. They were beaten with everything from fists to feet to leather belts, hangers, and other foreign objects. Sometimes, if they, quote, did something wrong, they would be given one out of 2 options. Either go 2 days without food or take a vicious beating. Either way, it meant that these kids were going to suffer. This was the world of pain that Shayna now found herself trapped in. A violent and harsh environment and brutal treatment that none of the children deserved. It became a regular way of life for them. There were times where the kids would be made to sit in chairs in the dark hallway of the apartment, tied down by cloth so they couldn't get up and leave. The day-to-day cruelty would begin to break the children down mentally and physically. It was as bad as it could get, and it would all take a tragic turn for the worst on March 28th of 1994, Shayna's 4th birthday. At 7:20 p.m. that evening, police responded to a 911 call coming from the Twin Parks housing development in the Bronx. The call was in regard to a 4-year-old girl who had suffered an asthma attack and stopped breathing. That child was Shayna, and the call was placed by her father, Orlando Bryant. When police and EMS arrived, they were horrified when they found her small body lying face up on the kitchen table, and she looked to be lifeless. She was dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. Parts of her body that were visible looked to be completely covered in injuries. It was the worst that they had ever seen. The call was about an asthma attack, but these marks all over her body, this was something else. Her oldest sister also sustained critical burns, bruises on her face, and swollen lips. They were immediately rushed to Bronx Municipal Hospital so they could receive treatment. But unfortunately, for Shayna, it was already far too late. Having seen the condition she was in, authorities immediately placed Orlando Bryant under arrest. Shayna Bryant, who had left the home with the rest of the children, was found at a friend's apartment later and also arrested. As soon as it happened, word would begin to make its way around. The truth of what had taken place wasn't yet known, but the extent of Shayna's suffering and how this all came to be would soon become very clear. An autopsy revealed that Shayna's stomach was bloated from malnutrition since she wasn't being fed. When she drew her last breath, she only weighed 26 pounds. She had bruises, broken bones, and fresh burns that covered her entire body. The burns went across her face, forehead, mouth, torso, arms, and legs from when her so-called parents took lit cigarettes and put them out on her skin. They also took scalding hot water and poured it all over her as punishment. She had blunt force injuries to her head and her body, indicating that she had been repeatedly hit with a blunt object or hit by bare hands with extreme force. She was beaten with shoes, hands, feet, belts, and hangers. Many of the lacerations, burns, and bruises on her body were fresh and on top of old injuries that were in various stages of healing, meaning that she had been receiving this treatment for a long time. She had deep bruises on her wrists and ankles, later learned to be from when she was tied down to a plastic chair. Sometimes she would be forced to sit in that chair all night. It was clear that she had been tied up for extended periods of time. She had bruising all along her neck from when Orlando Bryant began to choke her, followed by the savage beating that would leave every one of her internal organs damaged, even leaving her with a bruised heart. According to some of the other children in the home, this happened often. There were times where Shayna Bryant would tell Shayna that she hated her and called her ugly. It was stated that she held a deep resentment for Shayna because when she was born addicted to drugs is when the rest of the children were taken away. In Shayna Bryant's mind, none of this was her fault. It was Shayna's, when she was the one addicted to drugs while pregnant. When they called her ugly and said that they hated her, it showed exactly what kind of people they were, how hateful they were toward this child. The autopsy results and the extent of this child's suffering was enough to sicken anybody, but authorities were even more sickened when they learned what set off the violent attack. According to some of the children who saw it all happen, this brutal beating their baby sister received was said to be because she started to drink water from the toilet bowl after not being fed for days. The beating started in the bathroom and continued all throughout the apartment, going from room to room. It was a relentless attack, one that her small body couldn't possibly handle. When the adults realized that she wasn't moving anymore, they took her body and laid her on the kitchen table, where she would remain until EMS arrived. When they looked at her hands, they were in a, quote, petrified state, likely due to her body being overcome with shock and extreme fear. Her life was literally beaten out of her. Orlando and Shayna Bryant would be charged with second-degree murder, assault, and endangering the welfare of a minor. The rest of the children in the household would once again be placed into foster care. As soon as word of what was done to Shayna made its way to the news and into the papers, the family who had spent the first 14 months of her life taking care of her and making her a part of their family would be among the first to find out. They'd immediately find themselves overwhelmed with grief and very much heartbroken. They knew from the start that there was a strong possibility this child would be entering a dangerous living situation, but since the city was focusing on family preservation, they aimed to keep Shayna with her parents, even if the record made it clear that this was a bad idea. Former Mayor Giuliani demanded a full investigation by the HRA commissioner to find out how something like this could happen when this family already had a record. Despite the outrage and the strong stance, the same thing would happen again just about a year later, in 1995. The result of putting Shayna back with her parents was her suffering a slow and painful end, an innocent life cut short after years of suffering. The family who loved her and tried to adopt her would be forced to accept that they would never have the chance again. All they had left now were the fond memories that they created with her, the baby girl they had all come to love like their own sister. Her foster mother was quoted as saying the following: "I still don't believe it, and I won't until I see her and I get to say my final goodbye. What I really think about the parents, I don't want to say. I'm gonna leave it up to God." On Monday, April 22nd of 1996, trials were underway for both Orlando and Shayna Bryant. Orlando would take the stand and admit to inflicting critical blows to Shayna's body that led to her life ending. Shayna Bryant's defense attorneys would paint an image of a woman who was battered and scared for her life. They said she too was beaten by Orlando. She was just another victim. But Orlando would say that she played an equal role in the horrible treatment of Shayna. She wasn't innocent, despite her trying to shift the blame. Some of Shayna's siblings, who also lived through this type of treatment on a daily basis, would take the stand to testify for their sister. They too stated that both parents were responsible. They would describe the events as they unfolded in heartbreaking detail. The jury would also be shown a tape from inside the home that was taken after authorities arrived. The recording shows the disheveled apartment in the condition it was found in that evening. Bloodstains could be seen on the walls of the bedrooms, along with the chair Shayna was often tied to, and her body could be seen in horrifying condition, face up, on the table. This video, along with photos shown, would remain in the heads of the jury. It was impossible to unsee or forget. Defense attorneys would try to discredit the children, doing their best to convince the jury that they weren't telling the truth. But no matter what the defense said, nobody believed that either of these so-called parents were innocent. When the photos and videos were shown, Shayna Bryant, who was said to be distraught when everything first happened, showed no emotion. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, there was just nothing. This also played in the minds of the jury. It spoke volumes. Shayna's foster mother, who had attended the trial, however, fought her way through tears and sobbed uncontrollably whenever details were shared of Shayna's last moments. She couldn't understand why or how the child's mother had no reaction to those photos and video, like she was just truly a heartless person. The judge on the case had the following to say to Shayna in court: "It should come as no surprise that you remain unmoved by these photographs of Shayna. You were merely viewing your own artwork and that of your husband. Shayna's small body became your canvas, and your cigarettes, curling iron, hands and belts, your etching instruments." She had no reaction to those words either. On Monday, June 10th of 1996, after going through every last awful detail, Orlando Bryant was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison for his part in the slaying of Shayna Bryant. It's unclear if he remains in prison today. 3 days later, on Thursday, June 13th of 1996, Shayna Bryant was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. When her sentence was read out loud, she had no reaction, showed no emotion at all. She would be released from prison on Christmas Eve, December 24th of 2012. The children who took the stand and testified in court to what they witnessed were brave in doing so. Their words said a lot. The jury knew that their experience was unfortunately all too real, even if attorneys tried to convince them otherwise. If not for those kids testifying, who knows how much lighter these sentences might have been. The people who commit these crimes often get a second chance, something these children can never get. While these stories all involve different families and all happen in different places, they all have the same things in common. Children who end up in a world of pain and resentment with so-called parents that shouldn't have been caring for them in the first place. A system where the idea of keeping a family together can also mean a child facing a cold, painful existence. Some live to talk about it, but others are laid to rest, like so many children before and after them. Details of Shayna's short life and the violence endured by the children shocked and sickened many. All throughout the city, people grow used to hearing of these stories, but each time it happens, it shocks the community regardless. It's hard to believe that this sort of thing could happen so close to home. While other kids might celebrate their 4th birthday with gifts, a birthday cake, maybe even a party, as Shayna turned 4, there were no celebrations. She spent her birthday suffering, fighting for her life until she drew her last breath. March 28th of 1994 marked not only an innocent child's 4th year of life, it now also marked her last day on this earth. During his closing arguments of the trial, the prosecutor on the case said the following: "We look to our mothers and our fathers to protect us from the evil and the horrors that are out there. But what do we do when the evil and the horror comes home? What happens if you're Shayna?" It's a question we've asked so many times before, and one that we still ask today, as these tragedies continue to unfold all around us. If alive today, Shayna would be 34 years old. Rest in peace, Shayna Bryant, and my deepest condolences go out to her siblings and the family who cared for her. You aren't forgotten.